Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our New York State of Mind Day. We'll get started now. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ashley Huerta, and I'm a senior at Lehman College. I'm also a member of the Young Invincibles Young Advocate Program, a leadership program in policy and advocacy. Thank you for joining us today at our State of Young New York Summit, New York State of Mind Day. As we all know, we are living in a difficult and different time. Before the pandemic, we were aware of issues that New Yorkers experience, such as homelessness, food insecurity, and mental health issues. The COVID-19 pandemic has only intensified these issues around us. College students are one of the groups most affected by these experiences. As we continue to experience COVID-19, we must ask, what are New York leaders and higher education officials doing to support us during this time of crisis? And how can students organize virtually to demand that our needs are met? So today is the day to share your voice. The New York State of Mind Summit is an opportunity for everyone to learn how to navigate the New York higher education mental health crisis. Today, we will hear from a panel of college students talking about their experience with mental health, New York leaders and elected officials, and Healthy Cuny. Then we will wrap up with a sign-on demanding change for our students' mental health resources. Together, we will learn more about the crisis and how we can organize together to make sure we are heard. So we know many students joined today's call, and we want to make sure that we hear from you too. You can use the hashtags State of Young New York and Stigma Free New York to join our conversation online. So just add us. I know everyone loves a good social media tweet, so just join us on this conversation. We want to know what you want to say. So to start off this event right and get some fun going, we're going to do a quick icebreaker. So please snap a picture of the QR code on the screen, or you can have, you have the option to go to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and enter the code 8338. So once you have access to our poll, let us know how you self-care. You know, we want to know if you have a routine, how often do you practice, and let us know in the chat as well if you have difficulties accessing Slido. So we'll give it a few for people to snap the QR code. For anyone who can't see or can't snap the QR code, you can still join at slido.com and you can enter the code 8338. Okay, so I know I love a good self-care day, especially after this very long and stressful semester. So what I like to do is, I like to order some pad thai from my favorite restaurant, sit back and relax and watch a good K-drama and, cuddle with my dog. So let's read what some of you do for practicing self-care. So you seek support. Yes, yes. Love good support system. We pray. Yes. Virtual therapy. I like the yes. We cook, whoever that was, slide some recipes in the chat, hanging out with my cat. Cats are good best friends. We play chess. Plants are cool. They always die out on me, but that's cool. Jogging and journaling. Thank you everyone for sharing. Yes, keep the plants and pets alive. Thank you, Diana. Especially 8338, whoever that was, that's funny. Tara, yes. Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing with us. We really do love a good self-care day, and because we are focusing on mental health today, we want to make sure that everyone practices self-care. Everyone deserves it. So thank you everyone for your responses. You can keep adding on some responses if you'd like, and we'll look at it later on. But for now, let me pass it on to Rosemary so she can introduce our student panel for today.
Thank you, Ashley, for that fun icebreaker, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosemary Arzu. I'm a sophomore at Hostos Community College, majoring in science. I'm really grateful to be here and really happy to see you all. Now, we're happy to have students with us sharing the experience with mental health service on campus. We know that many of you can relate some of the challenges that they face in access services, and we hope that you can support our work to improve services and increase access to this critical support. Now, I would like to introduce our student panel. First, we have Anna Compton. Anna is a senior at Hunter College. She's majoring in political science and minoring in international relations and human rights. Next, we have Abigail Rojas. Abigail is a sophomore and a first-generation college student attending BNCC majoring in psychology. Last but not least, we have Lisa Mishmura, who is a former Young advocate and recent graduate of John Jay College, where she earned a degree in criminology. Thank you all for participating. You have 2 minutes to answer the question, the specific question for you, and then a minute to answer the general question. For those of you listening today, please feel free to ask questions. You can drop into the Q&A located on the bottom of the screen. And at the end of the panel, I will choose one question or two to ask them. And then I would like to start with our presenter. I'm having some technical difficulties. I would like to start with Anna. Please, the next slide. The next slide, I would like to start with Abigail first. Thank you. Abigail, what challenges do you face in seeking mental health service and how did it affect you academically?
Thank you for having me here today. One of the main challenges I faced was feeling like I was being supported by someone that really understood my challenges. I'm now a student at BMCC, but prior to being here, I was a student at Hunter College, and there my experience was completely different. Whenever I did try to reach out to my professors and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, they would tell me, okay, you could stop by the counseling center. But whenever I would stop by the counseling center, there was always some kind of rejection that I kept feeling from the center just because I felt like I couldn't relate with the people there. And even though there are many different counselors available, every time that I would come in, it would either be a really long time in order to be assisted, or I would be told, okay, well, the counselor you're looking for is not available. We only have these options available. So I felt like that made me feel like maybe I shouldn't be seeking this service at this location. Maybe I should try somewhere else. But eventually it just kept coming sort of at setbacks every time. And I would just find an excuse as to why not to go. And the way that it affected me academically was that I ended up dropping out of most of my courses. And it really affected me in a way that I almost thought that I wasn't made out to be in college. Like all throughout high school and prior to that, I was always a student that was on top of my grades, on top of doing everything I could in order to keep on going. But as I was facing these mental health challenges that I was not used to in the past, I felt like it was just a place that I shouldn't be in, and not being able to access the services with ease kind of made me feel like, well, maybe it's not that I need mental health services. Maybe it's just that I don't belong in college. So I felt like that was the main way that it affected me academically.
Thank you, Abigail, and we're sorry to hear that. I would like to have the next question for Anna that you join first. The first slide, please. Thank you. Anna, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for being here. I understand that you have some challenges accessing mental health service at Hunter College. What was helpful to you in terms of accessing mental health service, and what challenges did you face in receiving care?
So I transferred to Hunter College in the fall semester of 2019, and I was facing challenges just as a transfer student coming from SUNY to Cuny. So I had an IEP, which is like a plan for students with disabilities. So I contacted the disability services at Hunter, and I was lucky enough to like meet with my advisor from there. And he told me about counseling services and how students were eligible and how, you know, I could do sessions on campus, and it sounded really great. So that day I had called to set up an appointment with them, and they didn't have anything available for me for about 4 to 6 weeks. And I was kind of like shocked about that. You know, it was August, it was the beginning of the semester. I didn't really understand how, you know, like a student could wait that long to get services. So then I waited it out. I didn't have the greatest insurance, and I knew I couldn't afford like weekly copays off campus. So I figured I would just kind of wait and see what happened. And maybe that it was just, you know, it took a long time to get the intake appointment. So then once I got in to the appointment the day before, I was talking with a friend of mine at Hunter, and she was telling me, like, you know, be careful what you share, don't overshare, because they have such limited counselors and such limited services that they send most students off campus to, you know, like therapists in the city. And I just couldn't really understand how, you know, like students could enter a space like that and feel restricted in what they could share and say. And so that kind of set me back, because I was having a lot of anxiety just as a transfer student and as a student with a disability, and being in a bigger school than what I had come from, that I wanted to be honest with a counselor, but I was kind of worried that like they would just immediately send me off campus if I had gone into like greater details about anxiety. So then the next day came, and I went, and I could definitely tell that she was going to refer me off campus. So I definitely tried to restrict what I shared, which I also just didn't appreciate that I felt like I had to do that, just because I had like a history of mental health issues, but I specifically was seeing the counselor at Hunter to talk about, you know, my issues as a transfer student. And so I had wanted to just do the 6-week or however many week session. And, you know, if I needed continuing therapy, I absolutely would have done it if it was accessible. So then I was essentially just given a list of references and sent off campus. And then after about a month of trying to get into a therapist office in New York City, I went back to the counseling services at Hunter. And she was kind of like shocked that I couldn't get into a therapist. And a lot of them that I had called, it was like a list of 20. And then I had done outside research on my own. They either never called me back or didn't fully take my insurance, or I was waitlisted again for 3 months at one place. And I was having a lot of anxiety. So I obviously wanted to see someone sooner. And then, or I just never heard back from people, or there were a lot of obstacles. And so the counselor at Hunter gave me a new list of references, a lot of them being the same ones that just had not worked prior to that. So I kind of like sat with her and showed her what hadn't worked. Because also, you know, I was like, if these lists aren't working for students, why are they like continuously referring people to them? And so I sat with her, and we called therapists together, which, I mean, I was grateful for her to give me that time. And I understand, you know, it's not necessarily the counselor is not wanting to help us. It's the resources are so limited, and we're not, you know, it's coming from the top down, and there's just not the resources for us, which shouldn't be, especially at a public school as, you know, like diverse and as inclusive as we should be. And a lot of students, you know, are coming from all of these different backgrounds. But so again, I sat with her, called them. None of them answered. So I was kind of happy that she saw that. So then when I left, she gave me a few more. And then it kind of just continued for 8 months. It was like 8 months of me from August, just trying to find a therapist and call and leave messages. And I tried multiple places, like every other week. I was like, maybe if I call it this time. And then once the pandemic hit, I contacted the counseling services at my school at Hunter. And I was kind of just like at a point of desperation. We had shifted to online learning. I was having a really hard time. Just, I had a lot of anxiety before, and then distance learning was like my biggest nightmare as a student with a disability. So I was like, I don't care if it's like even a 2-week session, just like anything I can get at this point, I'll take. And again, I was referenced off campus. So at that point, I was just kind of like not jaded, but like burnt out from the fact that, it was like an actual point of desperation. And I was trying to be understanding of the limited counselors and the limited resources, but it just felt like I could be at an absolute low point and communicate that and still not get even like immediate short-term help. So then through my own research, I eventually just kind of like started doing a lot of looking each day. And luckily in August, I started with a therapist. So it took 12 months, and I'm sorry if that went on for very long, but so yeah. So I would say like what helped me was learning that there were services when I transferred. But I also don't think I would have even known that there were counseling services had I not had a registered disability and my disability advisor telling me about these services. And then it kind of just took me on like a 12-month journey. So yeah.
Thank you, Anna. So it's so powerful. I know that many people over here, they can relate about. I'm sorry, you have some problem. Thank you, Anna. Thank you again for sharing with us. And then my next question is for Lisa. We have Lisa over here. Lisa, with the onset of the pandemic, were you still able to access mental health service at John Jay? If so, what was your experience like?
Yeah, so actually, yes, I was still able to access mental health services with my therapist at the time via teletherapy. So the program was called, I'm sure probably some of you may know, it's called Doxy.me. And also I was able to do teletherapy through FaceTime, which was actually much more convenient since I have an iPhone. And personally, I enjoy teletherapy because of, the convenience of it. So you don't have to travel, anywhere. So like for me, it was an hour train ride just to get to John Jay. So you can only imagine just like the amount of time it takes and just the waste of time it takes just to get on campus. And I also want to add too that it helped that I was still working with my current therapist at the time. She identified as a Latinx woman, and she was actually the first person of color as my therapist. And before that, I actually did have a white cis male therapist for about a year and a half. It was very clear to me after having this therapist, the therapist I was talking about earlier, that I got just so much more from my last therapist than I did from this white male cis therapist. But on the flip side, it was very difficult for me for 2 reasons. So one, even though it was convenient to have teletherapy because I don't have to travel, I personally think that it was counterproductive. It is counterproductive if people don't have a safe and private space to actually do and conduct their therapy sessions. So, the whole point of therapy, we usually talk, there's just an emphasis on therapy in terms of like confidentiality and having that privacy. And when you don't have that, it becomes very excruciating because you don't feel safe or you don't feel comfortable enough to talk about what's really bothering you and what's really like what you are really struggling with. And I didn't have my own room at the time, so I essentially had no privacy. And, as you can see right now, I'm in the bathroom. And even, during that time, I would go to the bathroom to conduct my meetings and also my therapy sessions too. So quite frankly, I just felt embarrassed overall. And on top of that, I wasn't really in the safest environment, both like physically, mentally, emotionally either. So that didn't obviously help. And another issue that relates to the point that I just made earlier was the ability to connect in person. So I'm sure many of you know, or many of you have experienced this, not being able to connect people in person. I certainly feel that, I certainly feel the fatigue even now. And I felt, just building off of that, I felt so much safer in person and on campus, even though it was, it is an hour train ride to get there, but
it was because I wasn't surrounded by a lot of triggers. And I also knew that I had privacy on campus because it was a room, right, that you go into with your therapist only. And also, you know, when I was doing my therapy sessions in person, it gave me kind of that space to not hold back, right? I often found myself, metaphorically speaking, kind of putting on this mask over my true emotions. So obviously that didn't help because now I wouldn't have been able to receive the full benefits of therapy. So I think, you know, overall, it was great to have that convenience, but also if you don't have that safe or private space to actually, you know, talk about your emotions and talk about what you're really struggling with, I think that it negates like the whole purpose of therapy, and it's actually more counterproductive as well. But yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. You are such a strong woman. We happy that you share this with us. Next, I'm gonna start with the general questions. I want to remind you guys that you have exactly 1 minute to answer the general question. I want to start with Abigail. We know that Cuny recently invested $5 million into a mental health initiative that provides additional funding to a school to use how they see it fit. How would you advise that the school use those funds? Abigail, I remind you that you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. So I believe that a way that the school could use those funds is by increasing the amount of counselors, but also allowing them to have training in terms of being cultured and being able to help the students feel like they're being understood. That's also like expanding their expertise and their, I guess, the way that they're able to relate to their students. And also probably having workshops that are available outside of just counseling sessions, because sometimes you don't feel like you must be going into a counseling session every week, but rather have something that helps you learn how to cope with your skills of, you know, managing your anxiety, depression, or any other mental health issue that you might be facing. So perhaps you could, I guess, expand the amount of outreach that you're doing by getting to a lot more students at once by holding these workshops, rather than feeling the need that every student must be having individual counseling. So group counseling could potentially be a way to increase the awareness that we're raising.
Thank you for your response, Abigail. Anna, same question for you.
Yeah, so definitely going off a little bit on what Abigail said. I think she made a lot of really important points. I think that money definitely could be reallocated in parts of Cuny, and I think what money is, you know, invested in. I mean, I know it's hard to like just be like, oh, put this money here, put this money there, but I think for the city we're living in, I know that there's definitely money for students, and I think Cuny students need to be more of a priority that they have and that they have been. And I think with more funding, there definitely needs to be, as the other panelists have shared, you know, more representation and, you know, counselors that can relate more to students, especially considering the climate that we're in. And I feel like each Cuny campus is obviously, you know, unique and different to the next. But I think a lot of it will definitely have to do with like, what are we investing money in? And especially now with all of us online, and I've noticed like a lot of the fees that we're still paying, we're not getting those services for, like, we're not at the campus, we're not utilizing them. So I feel like a lot of that money could also be reallocated towards more investment and more funding towards counseling services. And I think the group therapy point was actually really good about like what Abigail mentioned. I haven't thought about that before, but I feel like that also could not only increase like student outreach with counselors and have counselors be able to speak with more students, but also just kind of having students have a space, and it could be like specifically for, you know, different things in terms of like race or LGBTQ or disability or anything, just like students that can like relate to one another and be in a similar space together. And obviously not an obligated thing if someone's not comfortable, but I think there's more ways to reach more students than we have been and represent them more and just definitely reallocate money and, you know, just put more money towards us as CUNY students. So.
Thank you, Anna. Reallocate money. Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, hi. So I think, you know, what Anna and Abigail were saying were all on point. I agree with the fact that we need to first like hire more therapists of color and from various intersectional identities, whether it be your disability, whether it be your immigration status, whether it be your race or ethnicity. And also I want to add on to that and say that therapists also need to be trauma informed, and also culturally responsive if they are not from, you know, certain cultures, because even if you hire therapists of color, you also know that they come from different backgrounds and cultures too. So they need to be aware about other cultures as well, and how other cultures view mental health. And on top of all of that, I think that there needs to be more full-time practitioners and not just externs. So actually my therapist was an extern and she was amazing. She was awesome. I hope she's a full-time mental health care practitioner. But, you know, I understand, like, you know, externs need the credit. They also need to do certain things in order to, you know, get their graduate degree or whatever it may be. But I also think that consistency is key for students, and especially if, you know, you have like many students who don't see consistency or stability in their lives. I think that having therapists that are full-time, mental health practitioners that are full-time is so important. So that they aren't jumping around from one therapist to another, and just kind of like re-explaining the whole story, having to like feel out the vibe and all this stuff. So I think that puts a lot of stress on students if we don't have, you know, mental health practitioners that are full-time, that can stay with them for a long time. And then two, just real quickly, faculty and staff definitely need to be trained on learning how to appropriately respond to students who may be having mental health challenges or challenges that may contribute to that. Because I know Young Invincibles is, you know, on top of basic needs. And, you know, we have students that are, you know, struggling with food, housing insecurity. They may be homeless. And there may be issues at home. And so I think that it's important for faculty and staff to be trained on how to respond and maybe refer students to certain services, and not just assume that a student is, you know, not wanting to engage in the class or isn't, you know, doing well because that's what they want to do, because you don't even know what, you know, they're going through in their life. So I think those two are the most important things.
All right, thank you for your response, Lisa. Then I have my second question for you, Anna. Okay, the next question, please. Pretend I'm a decision maker. Okay, either a campus leader, a legislator, or a governor. What are your recommendations to improving on-campus mental health service, Anna?
Thank you so much. I would say getting to know the students. I think there's definitely a disconnect between a lot of people in power in the city and also in the state. Times that I've, you know, testified to assembly members or any person in power, I'm always met with, you know, like compassion and, you know, like I think a lot of times like CUNY students' resiliency is commented on and touched on, but instead of, you know, like getting those, you know, nice comments, I feel like a lot of times like there is a disconnect just because they're not fully understanding what's actually going on. So I think a lot of, you know, people in power and in these positions should connect with us more and visit our campuses and, you know, talk directly with counselors, because, you know, there could be counselors on CUNY campuses too who are also wanting expansion and know it's necessary. And I think that like they're definitely on our campuses with the intention of helping as many students as possible. So if it was a legislator or governor, and so, yeah, so, and like someone on campus too, as a student leader, I think it's important for us and them as well, just to stay connected and understand what's actually happening. Cause I think a lot of times it's just kind of like covered over and not fully understood. So whether it be like a student leader or someone in actual power across the city, if I got that question wrong, I'm sorry. Just connecting with us is important and having conversations and just knowing that it's not what it all seems. And there's also so many students that stories aren't being heard and not being met when experiencing issues with counseling services. And I also know a lot of students still don't even know that those services are even there. So a lot of more communication just between everyone. So.
Thank you for your response, Anna. Abigail, if you want to take this, please.
So one thing that I really find myself questioning is why is there so much stigma around mental health? And I feel like that's something that I really want to stress or leaders and or legislators to kind of focus on, because it does affect a lot of the students, and a portion of the cases that they hold at the counseling center are tied to things that could have been avoided. So I feel like these stigmatizing mental health and finding ways that we truly make a difference in the awareness that we're expanding, not just awareness in terms of the resources that are available, but about the subject itself. I feel like it's so important to make that difference for so many of our students, because we don't know how big of a difference it could make in someone's life when you simply help someone that's around and be aware that there could be simple things that you do that might trigger someone. So I feel like making sure that we're destigmatizing our campuses and making that awareness come to life, I think that that's what's really important. And that's what I would recommend anyone to do.
Thank you, Abigail. Lisa?
So first, like, I want to say what Anna was saying 100% in terms of the disconnect part. I think that there is a huge disconnect with legislators and people who are making decisions in general. And I think, just to add on to what Anna was saying earlier, is that, they should include us in these decisions, right? Because these are decisions that are affecting us and we have direct experience. So of course, I think our voices need to be heard on that and include more voices. And on top of what Abigail was saying, I think destigmatizing mental health and raising awareness about mental health is super important. And also raising awareness for, about different cultures and how different cultures view mental health. And maybe including some languages that, to talk about mental health, or maybe campaigns around that. I think that's also important. And something else that I wanted to add real quickly is that we need to take the burden off of, the main wellness center. I've heard stories very much like Anna about waiting lists, right? Waiting like 6 to maybe even a year just to get to a counselor or a therapist. And I think that if we have a strategic placement of mental health practitioners throughout maybe different departments around campus, and also including social workers, because we need to meet the holistic needs of students, not just their mental health needs, because there's so many other things that can contribute to their mental health. I think that that would be ideal. So, departments like, the Black Male Initiative, right? Different CUNY campuses have the Black Male Initiative. John Jay's called Urban Male Initiative. You can also have it at the honors program as well. I don't know if the disability center also has these kinds of services for students as well, but I think that would be ideal as well. So all of these things, I think, we should include in terms of, the funding for mental health.
Thank you, Lisa. I would like to end this with my last question. Please, next slide. Lisa, this is actually for you, starting with you. We heard a lot about the lack of diversity on campus counselor. Has this impacted your experience? Any recommendation to increase that diversity?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I did have a cis male white therapist as my counselor for a year and a half, and that didn't really help much because he did not understand what I was going through as a woman of color, as a queer woman of color. So, and also with having a justice impacted family member and having to deal with that. So all those things had impacted, my experience with therapy in terms of with him. And I think that we need to, in terms of recommendations to increase diversity, there needs to be a pipeline created. Who knows how that pipeline will be formed, but I think that we need to create a pipeline of diverse mental health or healthcare practitioners to work within a CUNY system. So maybe it could be a fellowship, or more practitioners of color or from, various intersecting identities can be in the field. So, the fellowship or the pipeline, however that will take form, like should be, should include multicultural psychology studies, incorporate learning trauma-informed practices, of various backgrounds and identities. And this would also include people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, because I know specifically at John Jay, we have the Justice and Opportunity Department that works with justice impacted folks. So that's also important. And also at the end, it should guarantee that those who have excelled in the pipeline or whatever program it is, they have a full-time position, preferably at a CUNY school.
Thank you, Lisa. Anna, if you want to take this, please.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And I could definitely, as a cis white woman, I obviously won't understand what it's like to have a cis white male counselor, but even as that, I was frustrated with a past therapist of mine. So I can't even imagine the amount of frustration to feel also with this individual, just because as a cis white woman with a cis white man as my counselor, I was like, I can't talk about certain traumas, certain things that have happened to me involving men. So I can definitely get that part. And I also think that in general, CUNY counselors, even friends of mine at other schools besides Hunter too, have said they can't open up to their counselors as, people of color or as queer individuals. And so I think that, living in the city that we're living in, I don't fully understand how we don't have more diversity in our counselors, and we're not, specifically seeking that out. Just as a public university, I had only known a few of the counselors at Hunter, the one that I had, and then a few others that my friends had, and they were all white from my understanding. I'm not sure if there were others that other students had been seeing, but I just think in the city that we live in, I think that it's when hiring people, it's important to be like, all right, how many white students actually go to CUNY, because the student body at CUNY is so diverse and coming from so many different backgrounds. And so why are we hiring or having, so many white individuals come in? And obviously, they're going as counselors, they're, wanting to help students as much as possible. But it's also 2020 and there's so much going on. And just, I feel like it's, students shouldn't be feeling like they're being held back. So I think in hiring processes, or I'm not sure the full scale that the counselors at CUNY schools are on. I know some of them I think are grad students, but just, it's such a big city and such a diverse city, and students should be able to open up to their counselors. And so I think, definitely reevaluating the whole process of who they're accepting and coming in with. Cause it might be that some of the counselors at CUNY campuses could be more helpful to more private colleges, even maybe, and just bringing in different counselors and having representation. Cause even as a white girl with my cis white male counselor, I was like, I can't do this. I can't talk about specific things. So I can't even imagine having, even more differences with another counselor, and just, you should be able to open up. So I think just reevaluating the whole hiring system and making sure that through getting more counselors too, I don't think campuses will be as restricted. So I think a big part of it is also making sure there's more counselors, because let's say you hire or you bring in 5 counselors and 3 of them are white. The majority of CUNY is not white. So how are these counselors actually going to help them? So I think hiring more counselors and not bringing in more unrelatable counselors, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Anna. Abigail, we close with you.
So one thing that I've been learning about this entire semester is about how we have psychosocial behavioral norms. And a lot of it is just focused on an Eurocentric point of view, meaning that we're not really including the diversity that we have in the city. So for example, being an Afro-Caribbean woman, I would definitely not feel comfortable just sharing my opinions with someone that doesn't share the same ethnic background as me, just because I have gotten so much like backlash and different like negative responses. And one example I once faced was I was talking with a counselor and I was describing an activity that we did in my family during the time of Christmas. And I remember something that was so normal for me. My counselor's response was that it was so odd that my family did that. And I was just like, I was shocked. I'm like, well, it's completely normal for me. And I felt like constantly I kept having that like kind of comments that made me feel like, well, my family is not odd, but why am I getting these responses? And I feel like a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were just two completely different people, and I ended up not continuing to see that counselor. So I feel like it's something that we really need to push on, and a way that we can address is about like training our counselors and increasing, I guess, a demand in the fact that we move away from the Eurocentric therapy and move on to something that's a lot more cultured and that brings in Black psychology and many other like types of therapy that apply to everyone's cultural backgrounds, because it could really make an impact on the way that we perform academically and outside in our personal lives as well.
Thank you, Abigail. And thanks again to our panelists for their time and response. We really appreciate your time and participation today. I'm so grateful for you guys. And thank you again. And now I'm going to pass it on to Ashley to introduce our next presenter. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, for the student panel. And thank you to our student guests. Your stories matter to us. Thank you so much. So up next, we have a presentation from our partners at Healthy Cuny. We are pleased to have Heidi Jones with us today. So Heidi is an epidemiologist and director of the doctoral program in epidemiology at Cuny's School of Public Health. In addition, we have Erin, a current doctoral student in the Community Health and Health Policy program at Cuny's School of Public Health. They will be presenting findings from a CUNY-wide student survey on the impact of COVID-19 on students' mental health. Before we hand it over, I do want to remind you that if you have a question for the panelists, please feel free to drop it in the chat at the bottom of the webinar where it says Q&A. We will be selecting some questions to ask Heidi and Erin at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great, so really nice to be here and to hear from you all and learn from you all. And yeah, now I'm really curious to know what the statistics are around lack of diversity in mental health counselors at CUNY, because that seems like something we should work on. But today I'm here with Erin, and we're gonna share some results from a CUNY-wide survey we did in April 2020, which is you know, at the height of the first wave of the COVID-19 epidemic. So I'm gonna go ahead and have Erin, I'm gonna pass it on to you, Erin, so that you can do the first part, and then I'll be back. Next slide, please.
Great. Thanks so much, Heidi. Thank you so much for having us here today. We're really excited to be able to join you and to be able to share some of our findings and hear some of your thoughts. So I just want to introduce the study a little bit that we were working on. So it was a cross-sectional online survey to randomly sample 10,000 students of the 274,000 matriculated students at CUNY. And it was conducted in April of this year, really to assess the effects that COVID had on students across these 5 domains that you'll see here on the screen: educational experiences, household living situation, economic impact, their health impact, and lastly, the socio-demographic characteristics of these students. And so we were very pleased that we received 2,282 students who responded to 70% or more of the survey. That's about a 23% response rate. We weighted these for non-response, and the analyses consisted of Poisson regression analyses, and in this presentation, we present some of the weighted estimates and adjusted prevalence ratios for predictors of anxiety and depression. And we just want to give a quick shout out to the CUNY's Office of Academic Affairs for funding to cover our participant reimbursements to facilitate this study. Next slide, please. So moving on to our results, education issues were a huge finding in our results. And so you'll see here that 2.9% of our students didn't have access to a laptop at all. And close to 23% shared a laptop with others in a household. And we all know like how imperative it is to have a laptop at all, but of course to have one for yourself, especially when everything is work from home and doing online learning. So it's pretty essential these days. 2.7% of our students didn't have access to Wi-Fi at all, which of course, hampers their ability to complete their education at all. And of those who did have Wi-Fi, you'll see the graphic on the right-hand side. Most of our students, 52.3%, could do everything with the Wi-Fi that they had. And about 40% could do most of what they needed to do, and 7.7% could only do a few of those things. And again, this is just a really important part to being able to complete our work these days. And then moving on, 56.8% of our students reported a decrease in their ability to do schoolwork during the pandemic or due to the pandemic. That's a lot of students. And 73.4% of those attributed that to their emotional or mental state. So you'll see that mental health was really a huge factor for our students being able to complete their work. 59.7% noted that changes in family care and responsibilities affected their ability. 57.9% reported that difficulty with their changing to online learning hampered their ability to do schoolwork. And 48.6% said that a change in their access to space to complete their schoolwork affected this. Next slide. And continuing on with education, so 26.2% of our students reported that they expect to graduate later than they anticipated originally. About 29% were unsure about how graduation would be affected. And we found that students who experienced anxiety or depression were more likely to anticipate graduating later than expected compared to those who didn't report anxiety or depression. And that's 32.1% versus 19.2%. And you'll see one of the quotes from our study at the bottom here. One student said, "I have this feeling of impending doom, like World War III will start. I'm scared." Next slide. Thank you. So touching a little bit on the mental health outcomes. So this was, like I showed before, a huge issue for our students. More than half of our students reported experiencing anxiety and depression. 43.2% of those reported anxiety, while 42.2% reported depression. So almost half of our students also reported an increased need for mental health services, which is not surprising considering the numbers that we're seeing here. And that's to help them cope with this anxiety, the stress, the depression that was brought on by the pandemic. And you'll see another quote here from one of our students that states, "I have to isolate myself from the rest of my family who live with me. I'm not able to socialize, eat, or share the same space with them. It's added to the tremendous amount of strain on me and my family. My kids can't even see me or give me a hug. It's affecting the children. My son wants to tell me when will it be safe for him to come close to me, give me a hug and a kiss. My children are missing out on the usual love and affection they once get every day." So this affects our students not just academically, but across their entire life. And it was heartbreaking to hear. Next slide, please. And another finding is that we found that some of our students did report an increase in substance use, and you'll see the notable ones here, with the highest being 13.6% reported an increased use in alcohol, 8.1% reported increased use of marijuana, 4% reported an increased use in vaping, while 3.4% reported an increased use in cigarette smoking. And again, we see here that students who had anxiety and depression were 2 to 3 times more likely to report an increase in substance abuse compared to those without anxiety or depression. And I'll hand it over to you, Heidi.
Okay, great, sure. Next slide, please. So in addition to the high rates of anxiety and depression and some difficulties with education, we also asked about the impact on students financially. I don't think you will be surprised, although it is really astounding to hear that 81% of the students reported that they or someone in their household lost income due to the pandemic. 49.8% reported being very or somewhat worried about losing their housing. That's almost half. 13% reported they were often, and another 37% sometimes worried about running out of food before being able to afford more. 4.5% reported they had often, and another 13.4% sometimes gone hungry due to lack of access to food. So this shows that a high proportion lost income due to the pandemic. A very high proportion are worried about how this affects their housing, and a significant proportion have signs of food insecurity. Clearly, that makes it difficult to be a student and just to live comfortably. Here's a quote: "Since the epidemic began, unfortunately, only my uncle is working, and we are trying to make ends meet with the rent and the utility bills. It's been stressful because some days we eat less just to be cautious of how much money is being spent." Next slide, please. We wanted to see what factors were associated with anxiety and depression, to see if there's things that might be contributing to anxiety or depression. And so we used, it's a little bit fancy, it's called a Poisson regression. The point is just to see what things meant that you were more likely to report having anxiety or depression. So we found that females were 1.4 times as likely as males to report anxiety, depression. We didn't see differences by age. But I think this is sort of one of the crux of what we found that we'd love to hear your thoughts on. But we found that financial stressors were some of the strongest predictors of anxiety and depression. So if students are worried about being able to eat, they're worried about housing, those increase the likelihood that a student would be experiencing anxiety, depression, and similarly expecting to graduate later than originally planned. People who expected to graduate later were at increased risk for reporting being anxious or depressed. Additional factors, we found that being a caretaker for an adult over the age of 65, if you had someone over the age of 65 in your household that you were taking care of, you were more likely to report anxiety, depression, and having a household member experience COVID-19 symptoms. Again, this was in April before testing was widely available. So it was also a very stressful time when you had no idea if someone had symptoms, whether they were really sick, and we really didn't understand a lot about the way COVID-19 works. Next slide, please. So that was just to look at what was associated with anxiety, depression. And then we did a similar type of analysis to see what was associated with saying, I have an increased need for mental health services as a result of the pandemic. And basically we found the same stressors. So financial stressors, being female, put you at increase, you were more likely to say that you had an increased need for mental health services. In this analysis, if the student was experiencing COVID-like symptoms, they were more likely to need more mental health services rather than the family member, which is what we had found in the reports for anxiety and depression. Next slide. So there are some limitations. It's cross-sectional. So what does that mean? It means we took a snapshot at a single point in time. So it's not like the epidemic happened and somebody wasn't depressed and then they became depressed. We don't know sort of when things happened. We asked them at the same time, are you depressed today? And how has COVID impacted you? So we're not always sure which came first. This was in April. So that was before the first stimulus bill went into account. So hopefully after the first stimulus bill was passed, some of the financial stresses were reduced, but then of course, this is changing over time, and the $600, stopped in, when was it, August, and so now it's definitely a changing landscape, and will most likely change again in December. So why is that important? Well, it's hard to say. Definitely our students were impacted financially in April, and it's just likely that those financial stresses continue and are changing over time while we're waiting for the government to get their act together. When we were talking about waiting, so 23% of the people that we asked to participate participated. And so there's always the possibility that the 80% that didn't are different in some important way. And so what we do is we try to create a weight that adjusts for that, so that the proportions, the percentages that we're sharing with you should really represent the experience of CUNY students in general. So we did our best to try and make it be representative, but it's always possible that we didn't quite get those calculations right. And so some of our estimates might be off slightly, which is what we mean by residual bias. Sorry, we're using kind of epi lingo in this presentation. Next slide, please. So what did we find? We found a high proportion of CUNY students have been financially negatively impacted by COVID-19. An unconscionably high proportion have housing and food insecurity, and more than half are experiencing anxiety and depression. Those who have financial insecurity are at higher risk for anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression was also associated with increased substance use and expected delays in graduation. So what are the take-home messages? We think that for CUNY students to succeed academically and beyond, we as a community need to work to ensure, one, our students have access to mental health services. And I should preface that with appropriate mental health services, as you all said, with diversity in the counselors that will make for meaningful delivery of mental health services. And two, our students have to have access to basic needs. They need housing, food, income, because clearly those are affecting their well-being as, you know, just their health, but also as CUNY students. So I think those were the main findings. I don't know, Erin, if you would like to add anything, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about these findings and any questions you might have.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered everything, really well, Heidi. Thank you. I think, the biggest takeaway in what you guys have all been talking about here today is that, mental health and the intersection with our education and the possibility of doing well they're just so important. And everything that you guys have mentioned, from diversity to being stigma-free, funding and ensuring that there's adequate number and volume and quality are all so important for our students. But, they should have always been important, but especially right now. And so we're just really happy to be able to have the opportunity to find out what our students really need through this survey, to be able to use this information to translate into, a product that we had, circulated. And I think many of you have heard about already, our guide to surviving and thriving at CUNY, in hopes of addressing some of the issues that our students face. And again, just being able to attend conferences like this and talks like this, where there's a space to speak about it and talk with students who actually know what this feels like.
And I think I see a question from Anthony about whether the research shows different mental health budgets that vary from CUNY campuses. So I will say that the way that we did the survey, we didn't do it so that we could say anything about individual campus experiences, because that would have required a much bigger sample of students. So we can't actually look at comparisons by campus. But I do think that it is, hopefully this data is something that you all as advocates can use to argue, mental health services are clearly important, and to understand or to ask CUNY to explain to you the differences in the number of counselors per student available across the different campuses. Some campuses have a better ratio of mental health counselors to students than others, and why is that? And especially, I don't know, I came a little bit late, I don't know if you guys talked about this, but that the CARES Act included funding that CUNY Central is now putting towards improving or increasing mental health services. And so one conversation we had with Young Invincibles earlier is maybe asking for students to be at the table to understand how those resources are going to be used, to make sure that they're being used as effectively as possible to really meet the needs of the students. Did I answer your question, Anthony? The answer is I don't know. That was my long way of saying I don't know. Other thoughts or questions for Erin and me?
We have one more question in the chat. Yeah, so is it increase in substance consumption concerning to you?
So I think, yes, I was actually, I know it sounds like a lot. I was actually surprised it wasn't a higher proportion than what we presented. And I wonder whether that's changing over time. But I think we know that substance use as a way of self-medicating for mental health can be harmful rather than helpful. So I think, yeah, I agree. I think it's completely underreported. I was expecting a much higher proportion that said that they increase alcohol and marijuana use as well as smoking. But that it was even that higher proportion suggests that probably the truth is even higher. So it is something that I think we need to think about. And in general, it's not just among adolescents. I think the country has seen increase in alcohol sales across the board. So we know that many people are using this as a coping mechanism, and it is something that will have negative repercussions potentially in the long run.
Thank you so much to Healthy Cuny for your presentation and for your findings. I think as advocates, this is really going to help us with our advocacy and how we shape policy. So we will be continued to taking extra questions from the audience. So you have an option to drop it in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. But if you can't for some reason, you can also drop it in the chat and I'll try my best to catch your question. While we wait for those questions from our guests, I have a question here, which is, on previous days of the summit, we talked about how basic needs like housing and food insecurity can impact education. Can you explain how and why those factors influence mental health, as your findings show?
So yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from some of you all. I think, I mean, my hypothesis is, you know, if you're worried about whether you're going to eat, that's going to make you feel more anxious and you're not able to focus on studies and other things. And the same with if you're not sure where you're going to live. So it seems very plausible to me that the more stressed out you are about being able to meet your basic needs, the worse it's going to just add to your feelings of depression and anxiety. But I don't know how you all, and Erin, feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our survey, we saw a lot of students who expressed concern about, you know, the ability to secure enough food for their families and themselves, and housing security, especially with the the economic state right now, and the fact that a lot of people are losing jobs or losing hours at their job. And so I agree with Heidi. It was unsurprising to us that we saw students who were really suffering and were really struggling with that stress between, do I buy food? Do I pay my rent? Do I, you know, pay for my Wi-Fi so I can do my work and go to school? Or do I buy food? You know, these aren't decisions that students should be having to make. But unfortunately, we did see a lot of people talking about that. And it's, I don't know, I think, you know, it's hard for us to, of course, what we would like to do is make sure that everybody has all of those basic necessities, but our way of trying to contribute or at least try to help mitigate some of those stressors was trying to provide resources that students could reach out to or could turn to in hopes of finding some help on one end or the other.
And I would just add that it's got that sort of negative long-term potential effect, right? So if students who were already poor and vulnerable now have all of that vulnerability like increased and are less likely to be able to finish college, then that probably means that it's going to hurt their job opportunities in the future, and it's going to be harder for them to change their economic position. So it's sort of it's got some long-term equity consequences that could be really, it could heighten existing inequities as opposed to having education be something that can, reduce inequities. And that's something that I think I'm very nervous about for New York City and the nation as a whole.
Thank you for your answers. So we do have a couple of questions. I'll take Lisa, which is, what would your recommendations be to reach students who are struggling with substance abuse?
So Erin, do you wanna, I think we have some information about that in the Thriving to Survive. I don't know if you have it.
Yeah, so we try to provide resources that students can use, and some of the resources that we try to provide are either free of charge or like student to student or peer offered support, which we try to encourage, because it can also be difficult to talk about these things like you guys expressed before with somebody who is maybe not your peer or somebody who you can't relate to culturally. And I mean, some of the other things that we've been trying to do, I think, like in my personal experiences with students, is that every time that we've had situations where students feel that, so-and-so is turning more so to a certain sort of substance in order to cope with situations, one of the biggest issues and one of the things that we've been finding, and you guys can tell us whether this is also true for yourselves, is that students are often, I guess, retreating back into themselves, if that makes sense. So not necessarily reaching out for help or not necessarily letting people know. And so some of the substance use is actually not even known until it gets to a point where it's too far or it's too bad for them to complete schoolwork or to function on a daily basis. And so in our guide, we try to provide both resources within Cuny that you could utilize at various different campuses, but also in the local community and across the boroughs where Cuny campuses reside, in hopes of students reaching out, and whether that be anonymous, like chatting, where you can reach out to a counselor, or it peer-to-peer, which is also can be anonymous, or services that are pay for service. And generally we try to utilize or include services that offer discounts for students, or for students or individuals who don't have an income or have very small income.
Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you so much, Healthy Cuny, for coming today and raising awareness on this very important issues in higher education. Just a reminder, if you are a panelist, you can also answer questions in the Q&A, but we'll be moving on for now. So thank you so much for your time. So thank you. And I'll now hand it over to Tristan and Rosemary to present their research, How You Feel, Young Invincible's Mental Health Research.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tristan Tomlin. I'm a Purchase College student and political science major at Purchase College. And over these last few months, I've done research into the topic of mental health for students in higher education institutions in New York. So the pre-existing problem has become worse due to the pandemic. It was already apparent that in New York and nationally, students were already in need of more mental health care because that need for the services was on the rise. As we just heard from Healthy Cuny as well, we also have seen that students are suffering more, but were then from research that I conducted. And statistics show that SUNY campuses were already understaffed due to a lack of mental health care workers. What we know now is that college students, along with most young adults, were deeply affected by the pandemic. Now that the pandemic is in full swing, both campuses have actually committed to expanding like online services, but the time is, inconvenient to do that, since a lot of the demand is overwhelming already. And the only efforts that have been made are the New York Senate bill S7317, which was sponsored by Senator Grenardis. But this was back before the pandemic hit. This bill was sponsored in January. And so there's been no effort by the city and state government since then. Right now, like one of the biggest parts of our campaign is calling for more effort on the city and state to do something about the lack of diversity, the lack of funding on mental health. So what we provided as well is some of the best practices that we would see. Most notably is that Wesleyan, they have a way of putting mental health as a big factor into their curriculum. So thinking about how what you're writing is like part of like the way you think about your own mental health. And now I'm going to hand it off to Rosemary to talk about our own research that we conducted with our own survey about mental health.
Thank you, Tristan. Thank you. Yes, now is the time to talk about our own research on survey. We conducted a survey with peers. Our goal was to know the challenges to access mental health service in different schools and also the quality of the service. We received over 100 responses from 22 Cuny campus and 8 SUNY campuses. We felt that 99% of respondents felt that mental health impact higher education. Also, 86% of respondents felt that financial insecurity affect mental health. 75% of respondents felt that housing or food insecurity affect mental health. We asked them what is currently impacting your mental health the most. And then we find that 58%, they say that it's a combination between personal issues, online classes, and the COVID-19 pandemic. 88% of respondents experienced anxiety and depression in the last few months. 84% of respondents felt it was difficult to focus on schoolwork. We asked them why. And some of the common responses we have over there, they say challenging to work with multiple people at home. Also, they have trouble with internet and lack of technology. And they don't feel motivated to do schoolwork. 25% of respondents or students, they don't know about mental health service available at the school, and you can see in the chart. 71% of students, yes, they know that they have the service and the school, but also a big percentage, you can see in orange, 25%, they're not sure if they have it, and 5% they don't have this service available. Only 60% of respondents had ever attended a section with a mental health counselor at school. If you see the chart, we asked them to rank the level of satisfaction. 55%, they feel neutral, not good, not bad, neutral. And 23%, they feel very dissatisfied with the service. 6% feel satisfied, 6%. Satisfied, is a 14.3%. And very satisfied, only a 6%. We asked them for some recommendations to improve school mental health service. And the common responses, they say, we need more diversity in counselors, and then we need walk-ins, because when you call, they ask you for an appointment and they never had an appointment ready for you. Also, we need more information on how to access service and more professional and experienced counselors. And the last question, we asked them for advice for a community leader or a school counselor to improve mental health service. And they said that we need more funding for more counselors and more information about service. And also it is really important this time, provide the service online. Now I'm gonna pass it on to Tristan to finish our portion.
Thank you, Rosemary. Mental health is something that New York colleges can make a focal point of education practices. You can take action now by signing our pledge at the end of this summit. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We have a little bit of time here. I think we can take some questions from the audience if anyone has any, you can drop them in both the Q&A and the chat. Will be monitoring it.
Yes, guys, you have some question about our survey, you can drop them into the chat or into the Q&A located on the bottom of the screen. I see a question. Do you see any difference between SUNY and CUNY responses? Well, I had to say that for CUNY, I mean, we had more CUNY responses, obviously, as you saw it. I see that CUNY has a bigger problem than SUNY, honestly. I don't know if it's because of the number of students. I'm not sure why, but or maybe it's the system that is something is not working into the system. But yes, CUNY has more problem than SUNY in terms of mental health service. Tristan, you want to take this?
So thank you for your question in the chat. I think that what we've seen like right now through this summit and through the research is that just like a starting off point for the advocacy is a good place to start for students taking action. So everyone here is already taking action by kind of putting it in the forefront of their mind that students need to prioritize mental health, but also, you know, taking small actions by like signing the pledge at the end of the summit, and like talking to people and having a conversation is just small ways that people can think about organizing to think more about mental health access as well. Coming up, we already have our panelists who are going to speak a little bit more about what exactly students advocacy would look like in terms of like mental health. So that can, this is actually a great question for a transition point to our panelists actually. And I am the person transitioning to that. We're excited to have our community leaders and experts joining us today. We are happy for their insight in looking at how CUNY can make the state do have better practices in terms of mental health, but also helping students graduate in terms of like improving those services as well. So I'd like to hand it off to Abigail to introduce our three panelists.
Thank you, Tristan. I'd like to introduce Ryan Kamier, who is CUNY University Director of Mental Health and Wellness at the CUNY Central Office of Student Affairs. Ryan's work at CUNY involves the administration and oversight of mental health counseling, clinical services, and wellness services for the university. New York State Senator Andrew Gonardis represents the 22nd state district encompassing the areas of Bay Ridge and Marine Park, Brooklyn. Senator Grenades is also a member of the Senate's Committee on Higher Education. We also have Rachel Mackey, who is a psychiatric nurse practitioner at CUNY's Brooklyn College, where she provides psychiatric evaluations, medication management, and treatment planning. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to invite our audience to ask questions of the panelists. We'll be taking a couple at the end of the panel. You could just drop your questions in the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen. And now for the panelists, we'll each ask you a question and you'll have about 3 minutes to answer. We'll then open up the questions to the audience, and now we can get started. So question number 1 is for Ryan.
Ryan.
As the CUNY University, is he here?
I'm here, hello.
Okay. As the CUNY University Director of Mental Health and Wellness, you oversee mental health services across CUNY campuses. We know that Cuny recently launched a $5 million initiative that allocates approximately $287,000 per institution to use towards improving mental health services. What guidance and support is your office providing institutions in regards to use of the funding? How is CUNY Central holding these institutions accountable?
Great, thanks so much for the question. It's a great one. Just want to step back for a minute and say thanks so much to everyone for attending, and thank you so much for the invite. It's great to be here and to share some of my thoughts about this important need at CUNY. To address the question directly, the $5 million that that central office allocated to the mental health services was done in a very specific way to encourage the campuses to improve mental health services and health and wellness services, but also to make sure that those services are provided directly to students, and to make sure that the allocations go toward improving some of the areas that we know, and we've heard from other areas and other events like this that we could certainly do better in with CUNY. You know, one of our champions, our biggest champion for mental health services, Executive Vice Chancellor Cruz, really had a vision at the beginning of his tenure with the university centrally, and was really a champion for increasing mental health spending, increasing mental health services across the university. So we're really thankful to him for the vision and what he's done. And his part of this was to ensure that as this money was being allocated, that it was being done in a way that really supports mental health services. So the specificity with which it was provided to each campus about how they could spend it was really about increasing those services. I will tell you that most of the funding has been allocated to new counseling staff to be able to provide more appointments, to be able to provide additional services to more students to address some of the issues that we've spoken about. One other thing I will tell you is that some of the allocation funding is also going towards several shared services, which will be available to all CUNY students, including some crisis resources, professional development to help our counseling staff to improve their services, and to provide services to students who, for one reason or another, are not able to access services right now. Just for 1 minute, I wanted to jump to something because I had logged in earlier and I was listening to the conversation about diversity. So I wanted to just put in some information for everybody into the chat box about some of the information we collected recently for the City Council about the diversity of staff. And so I put it into the chat box here in terms of the staffing at our counseling centers. And there's a lot to take away from this, and we could analyze it further, but you know, we realize that while this is much better than the national rates of counseling centers by, you know, national organizations, we do certainly have work to do. And we appreciate the advocacy on the part of all of the students here to discuss the importance of diversity. And as we have the opportunity to expand our staff, we will certainly keep that in our hiring practices and the ways that we do things moving forward.
Thank you for your response. Now we have a next question for you. And before the pandemic, CUNY planned to impose a new health and wellness fee, which would charge CUNY students an additional $120 a year to cover mental health services on campus. Now that campuses are virtual, many students are concerned that they'll be charged with this fee without knowing what it will fund. Can you share any updates on the health and wellness fee?
The only update I can share with you is that there is at present no discussion of instituting a health and wellness fee of any kind at this moment. There are a lot of budget conversations going on right now, of course, because of the dire financial situation that the city and the state and the university are facing. But this is not part of it right now. So I've been authorized to say that the health and wellness fee is not going to be instituted at any time soon. What I will say in terms of the virtual supports and some of the CARES Act funding, we do have some availability in terms of services that are available to all students. And I'm just going to put the website into the chat box for everyone to see, which is the central page for all the services available at Cuny under the mental health umbrella. It links to all of our campus counseling centers with their personal websites, but it also has a great deal of resources there that are available for city resources, state resources, the resources that we centrally make available for all students. One I'll bring up just that's available there too is the 10-Minute Mind program, which is a mindfulness meditation program that's available to all CUNY students, staff, and faculty. And that is a daily mindfulness exercise program that folks can access. So that's just one of the many things that we're currently offering and will be continuing to offer in the future.
Thank you so much for your response. Now we'll be moving forward with Senator Gonardis. Senator Gonardis, as a CUNY graduate, you understand the challenges that the institution faces. What are you doing to ensure that more students have access to the mental health supports that they need in order to persist through college?
Thank you. That's a great question. And let me just say thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel and to be part of this summit with you guys. Really excited to chat with you guys for a bit about some really important issues that affect our CUNY community, our City University community, and the students who make that community up. I appreciate Ryan's comments and kind of explaining a lot of what CUNY is trying to do right now. As I see it, though, right now, if we look at the level of service that we're able to provide to our student population, CUNY has more than twice the national average of a mental health ratio to student ratio. Around the country, it's right around 1,200. Every 1,200 students has about one mental health professional on staff or is available to them. But here in the city, we are, right around 2,400 based on some of the data that my team has been able to put together. So I've actually proposed legislation as part of an overall package of bills that I'm working on to help support the operational needs of our city university system, mental health support being a key part of that, to bring that ratio down to 1 to every 1,000 students. It would be one of the best, most ambitious and aggressive mental health requirements for any public university system in the country. And that bill number is S7317. I'll be reintroducing that legislation in the coming year. We're just about to end the current legislative session, so we have to start everything up all over again. But I think it's really important because as I go around talking to a lot of CUNY students, and I've done a number of town halls with CUNY students, one of the things that keeps coming up is the need for more mental health services. And, that could be for a lot of different reasons. A lot of our, school is tough, let's be honest. Like, there's a lot of pressure to do well in school and to work hard and to, whatever coursework you're taking, that adds a lot of pressure that can manifest itself on people in different ways. But we also know that a large number of our students are food insecure, are housing insecure, are trying to balance a college workload with 1 or 2 or more jobs. That creates added stresses and pressures in people's lives. So there's a need for the city university to kind of provide this basic level of service and resource and help for these students who need every bit of help they can get in order to finish their academic programs and to get their degree. So I'm really hopeful that in the coming year, we can make significant progress on this legislation. I think it would go a very long way to helping support students, which is ultimately the whole point of this. And so I'm really eager to work with you guys on trying to make that a reality next year.
Thank you for that response. The next question is also for you. We know that COVID-19 has had a major impact already on the state's budget for next year. Although the executive budget is yet to come out, do you foresee any cuts that concern you as you think about New Yorkers' mental health? Given the tough budget outlook in 2021, what are some ways that the state can still support SUNY and Cuny to meet the growing demand of mental health services?
This is the $1 million question that's on so many people's minds, not just as on this issue or for CUNY, but really across a whole sector of our government services. The reality is we are in a really, really difficult financial situation. Right now, the state of New York is at an operating deficit of somewhere around $8 billion for the current fiscal year. That is why we are so desperately hoping that Washington, D.C. does the right thing and passes a relief bill that gives us resources to plug that gap. But looking towards the future, we are looking at significant budget shortfalls, by some estimates as high as $60 billion over the next 4 years. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of programs that could be on the chopping block, which is why it's incredibly important that as part of this conversation, we are also being very mindful of the need to increase revenue here in the state of New York, and to ask those who can pay more of their fair share to do so, so that we don't have to cut resources and services to our education community, mental health support services to our CUNY community, healthcare cuts in the middle of a pandemic that should be totally off the table. So we don't know the full scope of what potential budget reductions might look like, but from my perspective, I am fighting with every fiber I have to hold our congressional delegation accountable for a COVID relief bill, which we are so desperately in need of, as well as B, making sure that we are putting forth a progressive vision of revenue to help keep the programs we have fully funded, but also to invest in the necessary human capacity that we need moving forward. We know that even before this pandemic, there were needs that were not being addressed. This moment and this crisis gives us an opportunity to really double down and invest in human capacity and invest in our people. And that's what I think we could be doing, especially as it relates to the City University as a whole, which, as we know, for those of you that follow this stuff closely, over the summer, we had a couple of scares there with some of the funding being withheld on a temporary basis, some of it still being withheld, but across many, many different sectors of the government service world. Something that I'm really concerned about, but also taking very, very seriously.
Thank you so much for your response. Now we'll be moving on with Rachel. Rachel, has anything surprised you from the conversations you're having with students right now about their mental health?
Wonderful question. First, I would like to say thank you so much. I really value being able to connect with, I think there's 60 people on this. Just coming together is such a huge part of our mental health. And thank you once again for including me to listen to the people who are on the front line trying to figure out how to fund, how to distribute resources, et cetera. So I really appreciate that a lot. So I'm a clinician, a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I should plug that ahead of time. We are talking about policy. Oftentimes nurse practitioners aren't written into policy. So I'm here partly advocating for psychiatric nursing. We are clinicians. We are expanded practice nurses who work on learning about mental health issues. We're preventative focus. Let's nip these problems ahead of time instead of reacting. So psychiatric nursing is a huge resource for the college communities at large. And so just saying psychiatric nurse practitioner is meaningful. And I want to say that first and foremost, that I'm a clinician. So I meet with Brooklyn College. I'm at Brooklyn College. I meet with students there. I've been there for 4 years. And I see all different types of presenting problems pre-COVID. Now I have COVID people who are responding and struggling during COVID. And, there's something about COVID that is like situational or environmental depression. So things like isolating, that's criteria for major depression. And we are having depression essentially like instituted, isolating. Anhedonia, which means like not feeling pleasure in doing things. We're all kind of tired and stale, and Netflix isn't magical anymore. There's no enthusiasm like there was when this started. It's not novel anymore. So then there's the anxiety part of it. We have looming question marks. We have looming question marks about, is this, are we going to get the vaccine in time? What if it doesn't work? There's a lot of what if, which is a hallmark of anxiety. So my point is, we're living in some of the major mental health struggles that are depression and anxiety. There's something that's just the environment. But to answer your question, like what has surprised me, I think, as I've said, I've been working in college mental health for some time. I work with people with more severe mental illnesses like bipolar and schizophrenia, disorders that require medication management. That is my role at Brooklyn College, to treat pharmacologically. I have to say, a lot of people who've had mental health issues for years, they come into something like this maybe a little bit more skilled. They know their mental health, they know how to manage depression. And so what's surprising me is that a lot of people are stunned, they're at a loss. Like, I don't know how to cope with this feeling, and please help me, let me learn some techniques, let me try a medication if that's, if you think that would be helpful. We have, a lot of mental health treatment is kind of lifting the mystery of mental health and allowing someone to explore how they manage and how they cope kind of naturally. So everyone listening, you have survived so much in your life thus far, even going through a semester online. There's so many things that you might not realize that you're doing that are positive and adaptive. So I think I've answered the question. Yeah, I'm gonna finish with that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. We do have a second question for you.
Yeah.
While we know every student's situation is specific, are there any tips you can give to CUNY students right now who might be struggling to manage their mental health? What's helping?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I want to say this actually, I have to mind my own response to this, because I worry that it comes across as a bit trite or simplistic, almost like, you know, one of the greatest ad campaigns ever, which is the Nike Just Do It. You know, sometimes people think mental health treatment or the way to deal with mental illness is to just snap out of it or just do it. There is something to going back to the basics and making a commitment to yourself to just going for a walk and breathing air. If you can't tell already, I'm totally from Los Angeles. I'm not into the snow and the gray and the fact that it's midnight outside, even though it's only 6:40. Just like I brush my teeth every day, no matter what's going on outside, I have to go outside. So I would say go back to your basics and make sure you get access to the sun, move your body in some way. So those are some basic things. Yoga with Adrienne is free online. People love her. There's all sorts of different types of diverse types of workouts online. You guys know that. Most of you are probably pretty Instagramified, or whatever the word is. I will say one of the most interesting things that somebody told me was just coping with loneliness, that they found themselves listening to a lot of comedy podcasts, because it makes you feel like you're in the room with somebody, like part of a funny conversation with people. So yeah, I think kind of trying to figure out what your needs are. Like, am I lonely? Am I needing to laugh, or whatever it is? Like, try to identify those needs and find it. It's out there. The last thing I will say is art. While we're dealing with like this looming anxiety, this chronic stressor, anything creative, even like, I say adult coloring books, but it sounds like I'm asking for like rated R coloring books or something, but I don't mean that. I mean like coloring books that don't make you feel like you're coloring SpongeBob or something, but something that might be a little bit more interesting, getting in out of the amygdala, the fear center, this, you know, the fight or flight freeze response into your limbic creativity. Just give that part of your brain a rest and make something, do art, be crappy about it. Just it's surprisingly and actually good. There's good research behind how important it is to generate and create and tap into that fertility. And that doesn't require going outside. That's in you. I'm so excited for questions.
Thank you so much for your responses. And next we'll be having some general questions. All right. So this one would be for Rachel and Ryan. If there was one thing you could recommend to New York's elected officials based on the challenges you're seeing with students, what would it be? Rachel, you could take this question first.
I was actually hoping Ryan would answer that. What you got, Ryan?
I'm happy to go first. So, you know, Rachel, I'm also a clinician, and I think just wanted to also put that out there, because although I talk like a policy wonk, and I actually in my research do policy research, I am a clinician first, and I, you know, I think in that way. And I'm also a student at Cuny right now as well, so people may not know that about me as well. So I wear a lot of different hats, and you know, it's interesting when we were talking and I was thinking about this. You know, what can we do and how can we get more resources? And you know, we are looking at things through very COVID colored glasses right now. And we're seeing this crisis stage for what it is. And it's certainly a crisis, and I'm not dismissing that, but the mental health system has been really taxed for a long time in this country, in this state, in this city. And we're really looking at, I think it's important to have all of the stakeholders look at long-term solutions for mental health services. And you know, the senator brought up the counseling ratio, which is, you know, is the perfect start to you know, to making these ends meet when it comes to meeting the need. And it's ideas like that really would be able to help fix a broken system in many ways. And you know, having worked in the city system in mental health, and having worked for private organizations and for the state office of mental health, and you know, there's a lot of challenges right now in mental health across the board. So I think my recommendation would be, you know, look at the big picture and see how we can help every area in ways that are really meaningful from the top down.
Yeah, I want to just underscore that. I agree. And the being here and these organizations that are supporting this, that you guys are doing the work. And so I think, and I haven't been an elected official, I do know some, and I feel like their ears are open, and they just need to know that the people are with them on the issues that they're advocating for. And it feels to me like that's what you all are doing.
Thank you so much for your responses. For Senator Gonardis, would you like to answer this question?
So, I think I'll kind of answer it as the recipient of this, you know, since, you know, really you're targeting your advocacy to someone like me, right? I can tell you that in my first year in the Senate, I received only 2 emails about funding for CUNY at large from students in my district. 2, just 2 emails. I have the largest number of Brooklyn College students of any senator in New York City. I have the second largest number of Hunter College students of any senator in New York City. I also went to Hunter College myself. I represent Kingsborough Community College. And I believe that I have the 3rd or 4th largest number of Baruch students in anywhere in New York City. I got 2 emails. and they were both about the ASAP program, which is a great program, and asking to increase support for funding there. So I think this conversation, and those of you who have been involved in student advocacy, at least since I got elected, have heard me give this kind of spiel before. Students need to be organized, and I give them a lot of credit because I've seen this change a lot over the last 2 years. I've seen the voices of students really grow and really become much more effective, and they have done, at least from my perspective, I have now started to hear from the students a lot more than I did that very first budget season that I was in Albany. So I think every single student needs to know who their state senator is. They need to know who their state assembly member is. They need to call the office, send an email, or even just drop by and say, hi, I live in this district. I live on this street. I go to Cuny, and I want, Senator Gennardis to know that I care about funding for Cuny, mental health services at Cuny, funding the ASAP program. Pick the issue you want to talk about. This way they know that you're there. Because unfortunately in politics, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. That's just the reality. And if we are not hearing from people about what they are concerned about, if I'm not hearing from the thousands of CUNY students that I represent, it's going to be much harder for me to go to Albany, go to the negotiating table and say, I am speaking on behalf of these thousands of people, and like have that in my hand if I actually don't know that there are thousands of people who care about this issue. So I really think that, and I know that it's tough because everyone's got 1,000,001 things going on in their lives. I understand that. And I know that it's not always the easiest thing to, to make political advocacy or civic engagement, a priority in your life. I believe me, I get that. But I think we have to think about ways that collectively the student bodies can take on more civic engagement and really drive home the point that they are here, that they have concerns, that they have issues, and that they expect answers from their elected government. I think it's gotten really, really a lot better. I've seen the level of student engagement grow exponentially in the last 2 years, and I'm very proud of that. And so I don't say this to diminish the work that's been done, but we have a lot more work to do collectively to make sure that we get the message to every single policymaker in Albany to get on board with this message and with this campaign so we can make a difference in your lives.
Thank you all so much for your responses. We do have one more question.
So I can ask the question. So Senator Gennardis, would you and your colleagues in the Senate consider starting a movement to change the funding formula for overall financial aid to take into consideration the cost of living in the region the college is in? This would directly impact mental health as students' financial aid would more effectively economically sustain the students and thereby lower the stress and mental issues.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually put an answer to that in the Q&A. I answered directly. I think it's a very, very valid point, and I'm happy to take that back and kind of see how we can do that in a way that works and makes sense for the system as a whole. Once you start changing formulas, that changes how the entire system's finances are set up and structured around. So it's not so simple as just like, change the number here, because then that change there sends ripples throughout the entire spreadsheet of finances. So I'm happy to take that back and see how we can come up with a solution there that works, that helps support students more, takes into account those other external factors, which are very real and that we have to really acknowledge, but do so in a way that doesn't jeopardize the rest of the system's financial integrity. If we had all the money in the world to pay for all the things, this would be an easier fix, but the reality is we don't. So it has to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we kind of navigate the maze to a solution there. But I think it's a really great point.
Thank you for sharing that. And the next question is for Ryan. Does CUNY have a plan for preserving mental health services if the state makes major cuts to public higher education?
It's a good question, and one that we try to pretend is not a consideration, because we realize that cuts in higher education would devastate a lot of what we're doing at Cuny, and not just mental health. And it's sort of one of those things that keeps me up at night, if I'm honest. What I will say is that one of the things that has been helpful in a way about the COVID crisis, and about our sort of complete shift in how we operate, is our ability to be creative about solutions that can offer help and support in ways that may not have been expected. So I think one of the big things that we're doing is planning on what is our footprint with virtual services going to be in the future going forward. How are we going to integrate that into what we already do? How are we going to work with services that may be time limited if the CARES funding is time limited, quite frankly. So what are we going to do once that goes away? We can cross our fingers that the federal government will come up with another stimulus package, but that's tough sometimes to imagine. So, you know, in short answer to your question, we don't have a formal policy written yet to know exactly what's going to happen. But although I may be asked to write one based on that question, so thank you for it, and I will definitely think about it. But you know, one of the ways is that we've been thinking about how to creatively deal with these solutions in a financially strapped situation for a long time. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you again for your response. And we have one last question for Senator Gonardis. We know that there is a distinction between the actions campus leaders and elected officials can take. What are your recommendations for how student advocates should target their demands when advocating for these mental health resources?
I think, you know, basically the answer I had before kind of still stands. Like, make your voice heard. You know, obviously, whenever it comes to advocacy and whenever it comes to legislating, it's always a very crowded space to operate in, right? Because everyone is trying to get into the door with their issue, right? Their issue might be more funding for dairy farmers. Their issue might be more funding for mental health professionals on CUNY campuses. Maybe it's more funding for, you know, MTA accessibility. Whatever it is, everyone's trying to run through the door with their issue, so it gets very crowded quickly. Don't let that stop you. The key to breaking through to that is to be organized. Make sure you are organizing yourselves as strongly as possible. The bigger, the better, because then it's not just one email from one person, it's 1,000 emails from 1,000 people who live in that district. It's 5,000 people who live in that district who are making noise and really pushing for change. So to the extent that you guys can gang up together and really, target your advocacy and making sure that let's say you got 100 people together, you figure out who your members are, who your senators are, and really just organize your efforts towards them. That I think goes a long way, because then it shows that there's strength in numbers. I know that it's not always easy to do that, but I think especially in this new digital world that we're all living in, it becomes a little bit easier to organize digitally, and it's just as effective in making sure that you convey the strength of the numbers behind you.
Thank you for your response. And also thanks again to all of our panelists for your time and your responses. We really appreciate your participation today. Now I'm going to pass it on to Sharon, who will be sharing a little bit more with us.
Sharon, are you able to unmute yourself?
Sorry. So I'm Sharon. I go to Baruch College, and I'm going to kind of wrap this, but we have some work to do before that. And I just want to say that we are living in an unprecedented times, and the purpose of this summit is to identify how the pandemic has impacted the youths in our lives, concentrated in higher education. And that is why we're urging fellow elected officials with one of the most profound issues, and that is mental health. We will demand for more answers, actions to change, more policies regarding this, and hold officials accountable for it. And now, one of the ways you can demand change is through advocacy. And the easiest way to do that is through social media. So we have created a toolkit, which will be dropped in the chat. Also, you can use this QR code, and there's multiple tweets you can tweet out. And also, these tweets are pre-written, so you don't have to do any work. But you can also make up your own tweets, but use the hashtag State of Young New York and Stigma of New York to keep the chat going. For now, I'm going to pass it on to Ashley to continue with the pledge.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for introducing our social media advocacy toolkit. If you couldn't snap a pic of the QR code that was on the screen, I also dropped the link, and there that link will send you straight to our advocacy toolkit. So we do hope that you can use it. Just like Sharon said, it's so easy. You just have to press on the link and it'll take you straight to Twitter. So thank you. So as shared by Healthy Cuny, we know that before the pandemic, 1 in 5 New York higher education undergraduates experienced anxiety disorders, 1 in 6 New York higher education undergraduates experience depression, and 1 in 5 New York higher education undergraduates show signs of moderate to severe psychological distress. Taking all the stresses that the pandemic has brought us, from taking multiple classes to supporting our families, losing our jobs, losing family members, we are in a deep and heavy time. We must ask ourselves, what do these statistics look like now during the pandemic? We need justice for all of our students now. Help us get mental health justice now by signing onto our letter demanding New York higher education officials and New York leaders to provide us with better mental health resources. And together we can achieve a stigma-free New York. So similar to our advocacy toolkit for social media, you can just snap a picture of the QR code in front of your screen, and it will take you straight to the pledge. We would appreciate if you can sign on with us and join the movement so we can create a stigma-free New York. And yes, this link, the link to our pledge is available even after we end this conference today, and so is the advocacy toolkit. So you can access this at any time and make sure that you can share it to as many friends as you can, and we would really appreciate that. So thank you so much, and I'm gonna send it over to Sharon now, back to Sharon to wrap.
Hi, okay, so I want to end this by saying a huge thank you to Young Invincibles, especially Melanie, Marissa, and Neha. I thank you for all the guidance and the support. I also want to thank my team, Ashley, Tristan, Rosemary, and Abigail, for pulling all of this together. You guys were amazing. And lastly, thank you to every one of you joining and everyone who spoke. So yeah. And thank you for coming.